Hello, everyone, and welcome to this fourth edition of section number 6 on the Catalyst 9800 wireless migration series, focusing on a hands-on lab, actually. This is the last session of, if I could advance the next slide there, if I can get back my control. I don't know. There we go. This is actually the last session of this 9800 wireless migration series. It's been a very successful, a very popular series, and we're almost kind of sad that this is the last one, but actually it's not. We do have a new session coming up, which will be focusing on DNA spaces, indoor IoT, and the ability to make location-aware organizations there. But by the way, all this material, the registration is available through the URL at the bottom there, http://cs.co/9800 migration. And at that same link, you have access to all the previous sessions, recordings, and material. So if there's something as part of the lab that you don't necessarily understand, or not familiar, you'd like to review, you certainly can have a look at this material and get additional insights on this. Matt Gasparo, as well as myself, Francis Gerard, we're Technical Solutions Architect. We're part of the Wireless Center of Excellence for North America. And ourselves, Matt and myself, as well as some of my peers are on the expert panel, looking at the Q&A panel, and we'll be able to answer any questions. But as Erica said, if you want to raise your hand, ask live questions, everybody would benefit of it. So we encourage it. I know most of you out there are too shy, but hey, if there's one that's willing, again, everybody usually benefits when somebody asks questions out loud. Otherwise, you can ask it within the panel, and we'll gladly help and answer there. So a quick overview of what we'll be trying to do over the next hour and 25 minutes there. I'm going to be spending a bit of time on what the lab is, and more on accessing the lab and what dCloud is. If you do have an access point, we'll show how to connect that access point. It's not mandatory, it's optional. You can still do the lab even though you don't have an access point to log in. And then we'll look at the various scenarios in the lab and then close it off afterwards, right? So quick word basically on the lab, right? It's pretty simple. You have a Catalyst 9800 virtual, VM, and running in our facilities. Each one of you will have your own pod, right? So, it's the same design for everybody, but you all have your own resources, assigned resources, and more on that in just a bit. As part of that lab, depending on where you go, what you do, you will need to access the ICE server. So you'll have it right there. You have the ability to access workstations. If you want to go even deeper in various things such as Active Directory, it's there as well. Okay, and as part of the lab, we'll have a number of scenarios that's all documented in the lab guide. More on this in just a bit there. But we're through this talk here. We're not going to address every single one of them. We will concentrate on scenario 1 and 2, as well as 5 and 8, depending on time there. But you certainly can take more time and do all of the various scenarios as part of this lab. With that, so these lab resources are hosted within Cisco's data centers, our facilities. So we have one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast. And it's part of what we call dCloud, dCloud.cisco.com. And it's basically a resource that not only Cisco employees, but Cisco partners and customers can access dCloud.cisco.com. And there's a catalog of various demos available, the various labs available right there. You could schedule, you could access some of these. And others require some scheduling, but you could certainly ask your local Cisco representative to have one of these sessions scheduled for you. But to access the lab, so I'm not asking anybody right now yet to go to dcloud.cisco.com. Erica will post, when I tell her to post a URL in the chat window that you'll need to click. Now, when you'll click on that chat window, it's going to actually take you to dCloud, to a specific session, your own specific session. So as you click on it, each and every one will get a random session number assigned, and you'll get to this screen. You'll need to actually log on to dCloud. And to log on to dCloud, you basically use your Cisco website, normal Cisco ID that you use to download software and whatnot. So you log in, you'll have to accept the dCloud user agreement, forward through it, and then you'll get to this page here. And at that point, I'm going to actually switch over to my browser. Okay, so I'm already in my own session, and from there you have access to the documentation, how to access the resources and whatnot. Yeah, and right away I'm going to show how to access some of these resources. But just before, you'll see also how much time is left for your scheduled session. So you see here, I have 10 hours and 29 minutes. So don't worry, the session we have, is scheduled for an hour and a half. And we don't expect everybody to finish the lab with, so quickly. We hope that you actually take a little bit of time to discover the GUI with the 9800 and so forth, and play around with it. You have plenty of time to do this. And as I mentioned previously, if for some reason you need to attend to something else and can't complete the lab and you'd like to do it again, you could have your local Cisco or representative schedule a session for you, share it with you, and then you'll be able to redo the lab. If I click on the resource right here, there we go. I get a panel that shows, among other things, a link for the documentation. So if I click on this, it opens up a new tab on my browser, and I have access to the documentation to do the lab. You can, browse through it here, but you could also download a PDF version if you click on the right icon, there at the top right. That documentation is fairly extensive. It covers just about everything. And you go to requirements, what's needed, not that much. Everybody can do the lab pretty quickly. The topology is back up here, the same topology that I was showing a little bit earlier. If you go down, get more information about IP, internal IP, or private IP addresses, I should say, how to log in, using which credentials to log into to that specific devices. And then getting started, you do get more information. And when you see Show Me How, if you click on it, you'll get the detailed instructions as to what you need to do for that specific step. So with that said, what I'd like you to do, so Erica, if you could post the URL in the chat window, I'd like everybody that's on this call right now to click on that and initiate their own individual sessions. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for maybe 5 minutes and monitor the Q&A panel to see if some people are having issues. But I'd like to have everybody now, to this page, or so I'm going to dismiss this window. But I'd like to have everybody on to their session, login window like I'm showing right now. I see Erica's got the URL in the chat window. Nobody yet asking any questions. So if while some are still logging in, hopefully you remember what user ID password you have on our website. You don't have to reset the password, and you have access to it. Those that have already accessed it, do go to the document there, the lab guide, through the resource menu item that's on the screen right there. So if I move my mouse over here, so do go there, have a look at the guide, see how the guide is structured, download it if you want. Just want to make sure here that everybody has access to the lab. So far, it's looking good. Don't see anybody. Nobody seems to be struggling, which is right there a good success. All right. So, if some of you are having some issues, or by the way, some people have reported some issues with their browser. So if you're using a corporate laptop, sometimes they block various like remote desktop things, or so I've heard of people that they're trying, to open a window, which I'll talk in a bit there, and they get nothing but blank screen. Try a different browser, try a different laptop or tablet or something, because sometimes your corporate policies prevent you from using specific applications within a web browser, so that could be a cost. We're not necessarily there yet in terms of the resources that I'm referring to, but hey, okay, so hopefully you're all there. So what I do want to show here, I need to, in my Q&A panel here, I need to make sure I'm monitoring everything in the Q&A panel, manage panels. There we go. Okay, so next thing, so you got access to the lab guide, and you can certainly look around here. What I do want to cover at this point, and I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint just to kind of highlight this. So we've seen this. There we go. So accessing the lab devices themselves. Okay, so you're in dCloud. You see the web interface there. It shows the lab topology. Now, how do you access the different devices within that lab? So first thing, so there are three ways to access. The first one is you can actually access the Catalyst 9800 GUI using its public IP address. So I'll show how you get that in just a bit. But you also have the ability to do remote desktop into the workstation. I'll show how to do this. And from that remote desktop into the lab, you have access to ICE, you have access to the controller and other resources. And if you prefer, you could also use the Cisco AnyConnect VPN client and establish a VPN into that environment, okay? So if going back here, the first one is actually accessing that controller remotely using HTTPS and the IP address, the public IP address of that controller. If you mouse over the controller and you click down, you'll see that there's an IP address and a user ID and password. Don't use that IP address. That's the private IP address. Don't use that user ID password. That's not the right one to access it. To access the controller, you actually need to go in details. And when you go in details and you scroll all the way down, you have the public IP address and private IP address of the virtual wireless LAN controller here, okay? So basically what you do is you copy that IP address, and I've already I thought I already had, but I don't. So I'm actually opening a new tab, entering that IP address, and I'm actually accessing the GUI of the controller, okay? So now I need to log into the controller, okay? So hopefully everybody's following along and you're ready to log into the controller. Now the question is, what is the user ID and password I need to enter for that access? And that user ID and password is the owner and the session ID that you see in the session details. And this is, can be confusing. If some of you are not focusing on what I'm saying and you're still trying to log into dCloud, or you're already in the GUI of the 9800 there, and you're trying various username and password, this is a critical step here. So username, password, for the 9800 is the session, and then session details, the owner, and the session ID. So you click on details here on the top left of the dCloud portal, and you get the session details. The owner is EUE, so that's actually Erica's user ID, because that's Erica that has rescheduled all these sessions for all of you guys. So you can thank her for that. So I'm going to copy basically her user ID, paste it as the username for my controller access, and then the password is the session ID. So I copy the session ID and then go back here and paste that session ID. And now I'm actually opening my session with the controller. It's going to take a little bit of time. The first login into the controller takes a bit of time, especially across, these resources that are across the internet, shared resources in our data centers. It's a little bit slow, but once you've logged into it, when you move around the GUI, everything's very responsive, and it shouldn't be a problem there. Okay. And everything I just talked about, using the session ID and owner ID as the username, and session ID as the password, that's also documented in the lab guide. So if you do this a little bit later, you want to come back to it. As I said, you have a lot of time. You certainly can come back, and you don't remember what it was. Well, don't worry, it's all in that lab guide. Okay, so hopefully I'll be able to join here. There we go. Now, so I'm in the dashboard of my controller, and here I'm seeing that I actually already have an access point that's showing to my controller. Beforehand, I did it, right? But I'm going to show you how you could actually do this yourselves, how if you do have an AP, and how to configure it. But just before, I do need to talk about the other options to access the lab, right? So the second option to access the lab resources, I'm going to click this off, so is using the workstation that's on the screen. You see there's the orange whatever dot with RDP remote desktop. So if I mouse over it and then I click on on whatever its name, you'll see here its IP address, credentials. Doesn't matter really here. What's really important is you've got the remote desktop URL that's right there, the link that's right there. And by the way, depending on your resolution, that URL may be hidden a little bit below there. So move around to make sure that you see this remote desktop. I got caught by that last week. So you click on remote desktop, and it's actually opening up a remote desktop into that workstation. And once I get into that workstation, you'll see it logs into Windows, and I have access to various tools from there, including, of course, Firefox, and you've got Chrome here. You could use whichever one you prefer. Once I go there, I open Firefox, I do have a number of bookmarks, and these bookmarks are, for the equipment in the lab. So if I need to access my controller, I could certainly click on that bookmark and access that controller. And here, there's, locally there is an admin password, so I click on it. It's actually I'm actually accessing it directly that way. And once I'm in that environment, that remote desktop environment, I could certainly use it to access ICE and other resources. Now I'm going to go back to dCloud. The third way to access the lab environment is using VPN. So I click on details again here on the left of the screen, and further below, if you go down, there is a AnyConnect credentials section. So here's, you need to point your AnyConnect client to this URL or this host name, and there's your specific user ID and password. And from there, once your AnyConnect VPN is up, then you can access all these resources using their private IP addresses. Okay, so those are the three ways of doing it. I've never used the AnyConnect VPN for this specific lab. I do for other labs that require a little bit more, have more resources you need to access and so forth. I find the workstation remote desktop really cool and easy to use. But when I referred that some corporate laptops or browsers don't permit this, this is the good example. If I click on remote desktop and I end up with a blank screen that just stays there, that potentially is something with your browser, change laptops, and hopefully that'll fix it. Okay, back to the presentation, and we've covered accessing the lab. We're using the various ways there. Now let's connect an access point. It's an optional task. If you have an access point available, and for that you need either, you need a fairly recent access point. Well, maybe not that recent. You need a wave 1, wave 2 access point, or the newer Catalyst 9100 series access point. So when I say wave 1, anything X700, 1700, 2700, or 3700 access point, you could use it. If you have the 800 series as well, you could use those APs and have them have that AP, join the controller. That's part of your lab. That's going to enable you to actually see more as part of the lab. You'll see the SSIDs. You can join them. And if you join it with, let's say, your phone or tablet, you can generate a little bit of traffic, and you'll see some statistics within the controller GUI, which is kind of nice. But if you don't have an AP available or handy, don't worry, you can still go through the lab, learn how the 9800 works, how to configure it. It's just that you won't be able to see actually the results on an AP per se. Now, that your AP, if it has joined previously at another controller, you need to have it reset to its default values. You could do that among other things as you power it up. Plug in the PoE port. If you hold the mode button for 20 seconds and more, and while it's powering up, it's going to do a full reset, and you'll be able to access the AP and enter username and password defaults or Cisco, then enable you can go in enable mode using Cisco, and then you have the commands for, the first command is for those 800 series APs, and then the 9100s, and the bottom command is for the 700 series. Again, this is all documented in the guide how to do all of this. And the command there is, for the more recent APs, capwap AP primary dash base, WLC name. All of you have your controller is named WLC1. Uppercase, lowercase, doesn't seem to matter, at least it didn't for me when I tried different ways. And then you have the IP address, and that's the IP, the public IP address that is assigned as part of your instance of your session, the same IP address that you're using to access the GUI of the 9800. So hopefully you'll be able to do this. I've done it. By the way, your great chances are that the software on your AP will not match the software that's running on the 9800. So it's going to have to download, and it may take a bit of time. Okay, so, and when I say it may take a bit of time, I'm not talking about 2 or 3 minutes. I'm talking about, maybe an hour. So because of the way, the lab is connected, designed across the internet and so forth. So again, you have lots of time to do the lab after we're finished. Please feel free to keep on working at this afterwards once you get your AP connected. Okay, now what I want to do is go through any, let me monitor here, team and all, how are we doing on Q and A's? And so nobody, oops, I'm looking at a chat window. If I could go to the right section. So we seem to be doing okay, right? All right. Yeah, let's keep on. So hopefully you're following along, right? I don't see many questions out there, so I guess the pace is good. Again, if not, go in the Q&A panel, ask your questions, or you raise your hand and ask it live. Everybody again benefits from live questions. So I do want to do the first one, the basic WLAN design flow with you. Hopefully you're there, and you'll be able to kind of follow along. If not, don't worry, you can follow the guide and go at your own pace. Now, I don't want to go and I'm going to go and do that first scenario pretty quickly. I don't want you to actually follow along every element, but I want to do it quickly and then give you a bit of time to do it yourselves. So I'll be pausing and you'll be able to actually do it from there. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my controller GUI. Whoops, which one is my controller GUI? This is the tab for my controller GUI. And I'm going to actually go here, and I have this wireless setup. And I have two types. I have a basic and advanced. So the first scenario, we're going to cover basic setup. And then Matt's going to come back and do the advanced setup and explain a little bit how all of this works, right? So these are kind of a bit like wizards or workflows that simplify configuring SSIDs and sites for on your controller. Now you can do everything manually, independently, going through that configuration menu and going through each and every one of these items. And some of the labs actually scenarios actually make you do this, right? But to get things started, I just selected wireless setup basic. I used it from the top menu there, but it's the same thing as this. I click here on basic wireless setup there. So multiple ways to go at this. Now I'm going to add a location. I'll give it the location here. I'll call it Brixton. That's the name of the street I live on. I'm going to leave the default values that I want local mode APs, typical RF environment. Then I'm going to go to wireless and I want to create some WLANs on this. So I'm going to click on add here, and I will, I can't select any wireless LANs. There are no wireless LANs already defined on this controller. So I'm going to define a new one, right? And here, I'll call it quick test. As a profile name, and the SSID is going to be called quick test. Now I'm using different names as the guide says. You could use your own. You could use the ones that's specified in the guide. Do realize that depending on where you are in the guide, sometimes we reference those elements. So if you use your own, you keep in mind that, hey, later on, you may mention some name that you don't recognize. Well, that's because you used your own name there. So be careful with this. The status here, disabled. Do enable it because otherwise you won't see it, the SSID being broadcasted. Now for security, we're just going to do pre-shared key. If I could get to the right section of this, so I'm going to enable pre-shared key, disable .1x, and I'm going to put in Cisco as the guide there as the pre-shared key, and I'm just about done on security. And then on advanced here, if I remember correctly, do I have anything to do on advanced? No, I don't. Do I? And make sure here, going back to here. So no, I don't. So I'm okay. So I'm going to click on apply this, and here on this tab, quick test. is selected. That's the one I just defined. And I'm also need to assign it to proper VLAN. So I'm going to drop everything in the management subnet. Maybe not the best practice to follow, but that's how we're going to do it for now. And I click add. So I've created a profile, a site for which I have, an SSID. I could have selected multiple SSIDs as part of it. Now I need to add APs for it. Luckily, my AP is there. That's my AP that joined it. So I could select it and say, I want to add this AP for this profile. Now you don't have an AP, it's not going to show here. So put in whatever MAC address, just put in like anything you want there, like I'm doing anyway, right? And then click that blue arrow. So now you see I've got it set up for 2 APs. Now these 2 APs should have this, which should be ready to get that SSID configuration. So I'm going to click on apply here, and there you go. So that site was created, and I've got some APs and defined, and I'll see when I got clients. Now the joined AP says 0. Now that I've actually pushed this, the AP will need to reboot, join the controller. It's a quick reset, join the controller, and you'll see that number change. And one of the things as you go through the lab, it's going to ask, it's going to tell you to go to various elements of the GUI to monitor various things. So I could certainly go to my access points and have a look at what they're doing. Right now that AP's, joining, rejoining, so it'll pop up here. But you certainly can, do take the time to look around and see those site tags or policy tags and RF tags, what they've been set to. And one of the things that I really liked at this point to do is to click on the save configuration icon there. So if you click on this, it's going to offer you to simply save it or also show the differences. So if I click on show differences, you're going to see what, the before and after what's there, right? So I'm going to go and skip some of this. The changes there. So there's the Erica's user ID and was added dynamically as the session started. But what I really do want to show here is some more settings, dynamic settings here. And there we go. So I've got some elements that are being defined here. So I got a profile policy. I have a site tag, policy tag, and RF tag that all were created as part of this flow. And then if I go further down, and so there's my wireless LAN configuration settings with the pre-shared key. And I said, if I go all the way down, I see that for the location name Brixton, these are the MAC addresses, and these are the tags that need to be applied for that to that location. Now, I've been talking about tags, policy, RF, site tags. If you're not familiar with this new configuration model that we have for the 9800, I do suggest that you spend a bit of time and listen into the first session of that 6-part migration series. We do explain to some details, the whole notion of these tags and how to use them. And this is using this basic setup. I just started to use these tags and assign them and using the location construct that I called Brixton in the case here. You don't need to use location. Matt's going to show the advanced method. It doesn't use the location, still uses the tags, policy, RF, and site tags. Makes things a little bit different, more granular. You decide how you want to go about this. Per se. Now, if I refresh the screen, where's the refresh button here? There's my AP, and you can see here that the site tag, the policy tag, the RF tags. I used a simple basic setup, so it gave the same name to the location as well as the site, policy, and RF tags. Kind of simplify things. You'll see in advance there that you're going to be doing different things. If I mouse over my AP, click on this little icon there, this new representation of not only which tags are being applied, But because I've applied this tag, then I see which SSID. In our case, I only define one SSID, but you see which SSID is being applied to this AP. And other, what's happening for the 5 gigahertz and 2.4 LED status, whatever is rogue detection enabled. So a quick review of how that AP is working. Of course, the other AP fake MAC address I put in doesn't show up, can't join, you won't see it. And that's it. So with that, what I want to do here at this point is to give you guys maybe something like 10 minutes. The next 10 minutes, we'll be monitoring the Q&A panel, but I want you guys to actually go through that first scenario, spend a bit of time. I went through it quickly. I want you guys to look at the guide, do step by step what says the guide for that first scenario, and then we reconvene. I would say to let's say around quarter to the hour. I'll come back, or Matt is going to come back, and in the meantime, we'll be watching the Q&A panel. So hopefully everybody's moving along and not experiencing any issues. If any of you joined a little bit late and missed the beginning, and are wondering, how to access this, Erica has posted and can certainly repost the URL to make sure that you have visibility in the chat window to launch your session. And you can certainly ask questions in the Q&A. I'm not going to go back on all of the material, but we could certainly guide you through the Q&A panel. And by the way, if you ask a question, and you're concerned about other people seeing your question, don't worry, because we can reply privately, right? So not everybody sees the questions of everybody and the answers. So if you don't see any Q&A right now, that's because there's some stuff is happening privately. Some people are asking about a lab AP. If you don't have an AP, unfortunately, no, there's no access points that is actually um, part of the each individual pods, nor available somewhere in the lab. These are kind of all virtualized instances spin up on demand. So there's no physical component. So we don't have an AP that somewhere that you could have assigned to your own pod. So if you don't have at home or at work an access point now that you can configure to actually have the lab join, you will not be able to see APs on your controller and assign tags to them or assign the AP to a location. Unfortunately, again, you could still keep on doing the lab and go through the various steps. You will be missing out a little bit on some of this information as part of the lab. And once you do find an AP and want to redo the lab, then contact your local Cisco sales representative, and they'll be able to spin or schedule a dCloud instance of that exact same lab for you and share it with you, and you can do it again. And they could schedule it for 24 hours, for 2 days, or whatever time you need to actually do this. Maybe some of you want to take this lab and do it again with your teammates, and take some time on it, and that's good as well if that can help. And if the local rep, the Cisco rep, doesn't know what the dCloud is or whatever, give him my name so he contacts me, and I'll explain how to do this. We're just a little bit past, so we're going to move on. And while I was letting you guys continue with the lab, I did realize that I missed one step as part of the lab. That doesn't matter, but I had forgotten to actually configure the HTTP on that SSID. So I need to. Normally, you would have IP helper and the VLAN and whatever. We don't have that in the lab, so I as per the lab guide, added that configuration as part of my SSID. And what I did there a few seconds ago, actually, here is join the SSID quick test that I created. And you can see, actually, I'm getting an IP address, that 198.19 subnet, as part of the lab. So actually, my laptop right now, from which I'm doing the demo, is associated to, and I could show this, my AP. You see the blue light LED that shows I'm associated to it. And once you're associated to the AP, instead of using the VPN and the remote desktop, you could actually access the different resources in the lab using that connection. Mind you, performance is sluggish sometimes, but I am in there right now. And if I go to the dashboard, if the dashboard can refresh, as you can see, there's a little bit of a delay. Hopefully, we'll get there. Come on, maybe not. So, and here, normally what I'd be able to see is, one active client as well as my access point, and drill down and see who that user is and so forth. Now, maybe I could share it later, but I want to actually invite Matt to take over and to go with the second scenario as part of the lab guide.
All right, so Fred's just send the ball over my way.
Yes, sir. Oh, I need to expand the panelist view if I can, and then I'm lacking a bit of real estate here. There we go.
Awesome. All right, and I will then ask if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so as Francis was so eloquently letting you know about all the great things that this product does and the basic functions, and I am his co-host, Matt Gasparo, and I will go over the remainder of the scenarios that were announced in the beginning of the session. So scenario 2, 5, and potentially 8. This will be dependent on time here, but one of the things I'm going to go through is a little bit more of the advanced WLAN configuration capabilities that the 9800 provides. And if you're following along in the guide, that will be on page 18. This will be the use advanced WLAN design flow to create a WLAN. As you follow along, I'm not going to go into too much detail about these next couple of slides that are in the guide, but these will explain a little bit more in detail about how some of the functions like the WLAN profile, the policy tags, site tags, and RF tags are applicable to this particular part of the session. As Francis mentioned, if you really want a great explanation and a very detailed information on this, you can go back to the session 1 of the series, and they go into great detail about how to utilize these particular functions in the 9800. What we will focus on here in the controller are the policy tags, the site tags, and the RF tags, how these things work together to actually ultimately broadcast your SSID or not broadcast your SSID for servicing, employees, BYOD, guest services. So I'm going to spend a few minutes going through the particulars of this section, and as Francis did, we'll let you guys spend a few minutes going and doing it yourselves. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. So as many of you are probably diving around into the virtual controller interface here, as Francis mentioned, there are really 2 ways you can get to the section that I'm about to show here, which is the advanced section. Francis showed that you can get to it up here. You can click the wireless setup with the little gear icon here. When you get the drop down, you have basic and advanced. If you click either of these, they'll take you to basically a step through menu process. That's one way to get there. The other way to get there is through the configuration tab on the left-hand side of the window here. And at the very bottom right-hand side where it says wireless setup, you will have those same 2 options. These 2 go to the exact same place that this section up here in the top right goes to. So we're going to go ahead and click advanced. And what it will do is take you to a step-by-step flow, or as it says here, a flow overview of how you would design your wireless network through the controller interface. And, the interesting thing here is we will call out things that are mandatory, things that you absolutely have to configure, and then optional parameters that you would ultimately utilize in broadcasting or policies that you want those access points to imply once they're up and running, and then how they'll broadcast or not broadcast the information that you're going to go ahead and configure here. So at the very bottom, we have this Start Now button. And when we click that Start Now button, it basically brings to the right-hand side the workflow process. And you can see the colors are highlighted, very similar to the ones over here in the design phase. So you'll know which ones are, again, required, the optionals, and then ultimately what you would like to do. So you can see the first section basically explains to you all the parameters you can make changes or edits to or add on to. And then at the very bottom is what the access points that are associated to the controller. You'll ultimately apply these tags and or profiles. So I'm going to go ahead and start at the right-hand side here where there's a plus button. That's where you're creating any of these new features. The little hamburger tab here basically explains a show list. If you already have an existing configuration, and I'll just click that right here to show you, it will show you that if you have an existing configuration in here, it will bring those parameters up here and show them to you. If you do not, it'll be empty like it is here. So I'm going to go ahead and click the add button. And we're going to go ahead and, if you're following along, it'll ask you to put a profile name in. I'm just going to go ahead and create a quick one here. I'm going to start them all with pretty easy stuff. This will be the WLAN profile, as it's called. And you can use the same name again for the SSID and the profile name as a parameter. Now, for this particular SSID that the guide's going to want you to go through, basically there are 3 major ones that the guide ultimately will allow you to configure, meaning, what we want you to go ahead and go through the guide to do. One will be a pre-shared key, which is this one immediately. The follow-on, which we'll get to soon, will be a .1x SSID. And then the last one will be a web authentication SSID. So we're going to go ahead and do this one here. Basically, it's asking us to do all the basic things that France showed. Enable the SSID, define an SSID, WLAN ID information. The radios, some of the basic parameters. In the security section, as it mentions in the guide, we'll go ahead and we'll select the pre-shared key functionality. So go down here, further down, and we'll change it from .1x to pre-shared key. And as it states in the guide, we will use Cisco 123. And I'll go ahead and just quickly click that, and we'll hit apply. And that's about as difficult as it gets for the very first part of that configuration. The next component, which is required, is the policy profile. So again, I can click that hamburger button here, and it'll bring me it. Now, because there is a default policy profile already configured in the system, it's showing here, you can see some of the parameters that are pre-configured for this. You could utilize the default policy profile, or as the guide's going to show you, you're going to want to go ahead and create your own. So again, I'm going to go ahead and create my own. And this is the policy profile. And it's going to want you to, just like the SSID, go ahead and enable it. And, some of the things that you'll learn throughout this guide is these WLAN switch policies. I'll just highlight a couple of these real quickly. The central switching is basically, as you would expect, the access point to bring the traffic back to the controller. Central authentication, very similar, brings it back to the controller. And all these centralized buttons being turned on brings everything back to the controller. Where these will deviate is when you get into the very last part of the lab, which will talk about Flex Connect and deploying it so that traffic remains local to the access point. Some of these particular switches will be disabled so that that information can remain local at the access point. You'll go in here and you'll select a particular VLAN that you want this SSID to be mapped to. Should be the management VLAN. And ultimately, you'll go to the very last tab, the advanced tab here. And the only thing it wants you to do is go ahead and provide a DHCP server that the users will ultimately get connected to and get their IP addresses from. Lastly, you'll go ahead and hit apply here, and that will create your new policy. Now, it's very important, as you probably saw, as you'll read in the guide, the policy and the profile are extremely important parts. These are two components that are required to make an SSID propagate out of an access point, right? And as you saw in the basic tab, you really didn't have to do too much detail around these particular configurations, as they were kind of a step-by-step process already working you through it. This one you do have to go in, and the whole point of the advanced one is that you are required to create these individually. And then the last one will be the policy tag. Again, there is a default policy tag here. You can go ahead and utilize that one, or you can go ahead and create your own, as I'm going to do here and show you real quick. So we're going to call Matt G. Oh, it's not letting me type in there. Now, the job of the policy tag is to adjoin the profile that you want mapped to the policy. As you saw, I created a profile called WLAN profile, Matt G WLAN profile, and I created a policy called Matt G. Now, it's very possible you might have a single policy, but you might need an SSID to be manipulated or do two different things but you want to use the same policy. So you are allowed to do that, right? So I can use the same policy for several SSIDs if I need it. So that's why we provide the flexibility of decoupling the WLAN information from the policy information. And as I click the checkbox there, it adds it to the bottom here, and I'm going to hit apply, and I now have a new policy tag. And if I click that policy tag again, it'll bring up the two profiles and the policy profile that I have associated with this policy. Now, at this point, you could just apply this policy tag to an access point, and it would just start broadcasting that new SSID and impose that policy, that pre-shared key policy information and VLAN and DHCP to the SSID, and then people can connect and connect that way. I'm going to go ahead and show you the very last process of that. Now, like I said, the next two sections here, these profile, AP join profile, the flex, the site tag, the RF profile, the RF tag, these are all optional. There are actually default settings already done in the system for each of these. Again, you can utilize the default ones. As you'll be seeing, I'm going down the list here. And then ultimately, you will click the AP tag. Now, if you have an access point associated to these virtual controllers over the internet, as a couple people were asking in the Q&A, you will see your access point here, and you will be able to click the associate tags. Now, I don't particularly have one set up for that for the cloud, but I do have one here set up in my own lab. I'll just show everyone what that would look like if you want to see what it actually looks like here. So I'm going to go ahead and click start now. I'm going to go ahead and click that AP tag. I have an AP associated to this controller. It got a policy tag and a site tag and an RF tag already associated to it. In your lab environment, you'll have the similar thing. If you have an AP associated to it, you'll click the tag APs. You'll get a drop down, and now this is where you can select those things. So I can pick my remote policy, which would have been the MAT-G policy. And then here I'll have the MAT-G site tag. And then I can pick a type of RF profile. I can hit apply. And then what it will do is if it successfully pushed those parameters to the access point, it will impose those parameters. And within a few minutes, if you go to configuration wireless access points, you should see that that access point, when it rejoins the controller, it will have all of those new parameters associated with it. So that's about all there is in this particular section. I'm going to go ahead and, as Francis did, we're going to go ahead and give you roughly 10 minutes here. Go ahead and try that for yourselves. Create the different things that it wants you to in the lab, and that will take us up to the next one of the guide, which will be detailed WLAN configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and put that back up here. And I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute, and we'll come back here in about 10 minutes. right. So I think we're right there, right at that time. Again, as Francis may have mentioned, probably if you didn't get all the way through that particular scenario two here in the lab, again, you'll have a lot of time. The session's open to you guys to continue remotely accessing it. So by all means, feel free to continue this after today's session here. The next section that we'll get into is scenario 5. Now, in between, as it was mentioned, scenario 3 and 4, there's application visibility, local profiling, as it says here. These are all things that you would additionally add on to after you deploy an SSID potentially, or setting up during that advanced configuration. But some of the things inside an SSID, things like, if you don't want to use pre-shared key and you want a .1x authentication mechanism, or you want a web portal page for any number of scenarios, those are the components that we're going to go over here in scenario 5. So if you're following along, this will be in the guide. It will be scenario 5. We're going to just quickly highlight defining a AAA server, and then I'm going to let everyone go ahead and try that out here. So scenario 5, basically, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the controller so we can step through that. So this will be under the configuration section, and this will be in the AAA area of the configuration. Now, if you're familiar with Cisco switches and Cisco routers, traditionally, a lot of this stuff may actually look familiar already. So you'll have a couple of things you need to configure here real quickly. You'll have a server that you want to point to. In this situation, it's talking about the ICE server. And we're going to go ahead and put that in here real quick. So this will be the server. It'll ask you for an IP address. Again, these are all the very required rudimentary settings that is needed for the system. It will want you to put a key in here. Where's the key? Right there. So we'll go ahead and put what it wants, Cisco 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't let you see that. And we'll go ahead and hit apply. A lot of these other parameters, actually, I got to put it in twice here. So we'll do Cisco 2, 3, 4, 5. Some of these are default parameters that are pretty rudimentary and standard in most environments. So 1812 and 1813 will be your accounting. You'll want to turn possibly supporting change of authorization. You hit apply. It'll create that setting here. The next one, if you have multiple servers, you might potentially utilize the server group feature, which allows you to generate a ICE group. So you might have multiple servers, and some of these settings down here, again, might look familiar, like the MAC delimiter, MAC filtering, the dead time. Now, if you have multiple servers, this dead time is a very important variable. This is the amount of time that the system, if it tries to send an authentication packet out to, if it doesn't hear a response, the controller will deem it down. It'll wait the 10-minute time period and then retry again. So it'll mark it as unavailable for that time period. And that's how that works. Now, if you have multiple servers, you'll see those servers listed here down below. I'm going to go ahead and pick the one that I created, move it over to the assigned server section, hit apply, and now I have a server inside of a server group, and that's about as complicated as creating a AAA server in here is. Now, the authentication methods, you have your traditional authentication, authorization, and accounting, and what it'll want you to do is create a, there is some default, again, there's a lot of default stuff already left in the system for if you want to use those, but it's going to ask you to go ahead and create one here, and you could go ahead and use the one that it asks you to utilize in here. I think it's going to say something like, go ahead and keep default. And you're going to select .1x. You'll use a group method. Instead of just doing the local would be an actual authentication mechanism local to the machine. It's going to use the group method. You're going to choose the group that you created before and hit apply, and you will now have an authentication method set up that you can use in your SSIDs. Same thing with authorization. You can create a new method list here. It'll ask you what type of authorization you want. This to be network authorization. That's the one important variable to select there. Again, you want the group type. You don't want it to be local. You want it to be a group, and that group will be down below. That'll be the group that you created again. You'll hit apply, and now you have an authorization method. And the last one being the accounting process. You can put anything you want in here. And the type that you need is going to be identity, because that's what the method of information that you want to record on is the identity of users. And then you'll click the group, assign that over here, and now you have an accounting setup for this. Ultimately, on the last page, there will be all the AAA advanced features and functions. Do you want local authentication? No, you want to use a method list. Do you want the authentication to use the default setting, and then the authorization to use either the default or method list settings? So all of these, and then do you want load balancing if you have multiple servers, individualized servers instead of a group, or multiple groups, so you can use a load balancing function. A lot of these settings will let you go into further capabilities of really defining how the AAA will work. And ultimately, once you have all those settings, you'll then create an SSID. It's going to ask you to create an SSID that you'll want to apply the .1x settings to. And that will be further down in the guide there. And then the last one it's going to want you to do is set up a web authentication SSID that will use captive portal bypass. And just to quickly highlight the reason for that is if you're using an Apple device, and one of the things that it explains in the guide here is that the Apple Captive Network Assistant functionality is utilized, and by doing that, it's unable to fulfill the BYOD onboarding process. So they're going to have a captive portal bypass functionality when you're developing your web authentication. With that being said, I think we can give you guys either the time to do it, or we can go ahead and round out the session here. What do you guys think, Francis? Want to go ahead and
Maybe we could give 5 minutes, very short period, because we are short on time. Let's give 5 minutes, reconvene in 22 or something after the hour, and close off with that last scenario in closing words.
Excellent. All right. right, so we're running down here on the time period. I'm going to go ahead and just quickly explain scenario 8, which is what we call creating a Flex Connect WLAN. If you're not familiar with what Flex Connect is, I highly recommend going back and reviewing session 2 of these webinar series. They go into great detail about all the methods and capabilities that Flex Connect provides. To give you just a quick idea of what it basically is, when an access point communicates with a wireless LAN controller in the environment, you can go ahead and drop the data traffic of the users remotely off at where the access point is directly connected to, and it will not bring the traffic back to the centralized controller. So if this is something of interest to you, go ahead and review session 2, which will go into that, and then go ahead and try this out in scenario 8 here. Now, again, we understand that the 90 minutes that we've given you today in today's session is not going to be in too much detail of all these particular scenarios. We've tried to highlight the most important ones and give you guys as much information about them and getting you a little bit into utilizing each of them. Hopefully, you'll be able to continue using this lab after this session here, and as we have set up, you do get a multitude of number of hours here. If you do need access, continued access, or you do want to try this again, there are a number of ways to do this, and I'll go ahead and explain a couple of those here in a second. So some of the takeaways we reviewed today, we went over a lot of what this session was, and giving you access to the environment, getting you access to it, going over a couple of different scenarios, the basic and advanced capabilities of setting up SSIDs on the new 9800 platforms. Additionally, getting you some more advanced functionalities into changing some of the more advanced features in the product, like the WLAN detailed configurations, .1x, possibly utilizing other capabilities like ICE, which is available in the lab, along with doing some things like Flex Connect. So those are some of the things that we've gone and we've given you the access and capabilities to. If you want to learn more about this stuff, we have a number of different things available. Cisco Live, just as many of you might be aware, just wrapped up last week, and you can grab a lot of great content on CiscoLive.com. They have a lot of great published information, design guides, deployment scenarios, all utilizing the new platform. That's a great source of information, and as some of these links here have some additionally great levels of information. Now, just to wrap up some of the things, this does wrap up the very last of this particular session series. As mentioned, there is a new one coming up that will be available next Thursday. I'll hit that here in a second. But again, just to recap, if you've missed any of these prior ones, you do have access to cs.co/9800 migration. It gives you access to the content, the videos that were actually of these sessions. You can go review them. Again, I would highly recommend session 2 being the migration for Flex Connect if you're going to try scenario number 8. And then session 3 is a great one that goes over if you don't have access to a physical wireless LAN controller in your environment, and you want to continue on utilizing these sessions. Another great way to do it is deploying a private cloud version of this in a virtual environment. Session number 3 goes over a great way of deploying a private and or public cloud version of this software in your environment so that you can go ahead and continue these sessions if you want on your own. We do have one more session, as mentioned early on in the beginning here. It is coming up next week, I believe, right? Is that next week, April 22nd? And it will have great. And we'll have a location aware for organization. It talks a lot about our DNA spaces and being able to do things like BLE and Zigbee and all those great add-ons and IoT services that you might want to utilize. With that being said, I want to thank everyone for your time joining today, me and Francis and the team here. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Erica. Do you want to go ahead and provide any closing sentiment, any potential Q&A left in the session chat there?
Thanks, Matt. No, actually, we're all good. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. Again, you can access the resources after the event, and you will be getting a survey. So please let us know how we did today, and we greatly appreciate it. Thank you all.
All right. Thanks, Saul.